The rain is intensified. Thunder wraps around the mountains, lightning tears through the sky. The innkeeper gestures to me. "Come inside, sir. You'll get soaked." But I remain, because even if the rain can't wash away my memories, at least it takes away their warmth. And I don't love warmth anymore, because warmth reminds me of that room. That curse called the Paradise Room. If someone ever tells you that paradise has a door in this world, don't believe them, because that door actually opens to hell. I learned this too late. In the second year, when I was 18, when I entered that room, everything changed. And I was never the old Moloch again. A person doesn't realize it when they're selling their soul, because the soul goes piece by piece, not all at once. The first piece goes when you leave your family. The second piece, when you tell your first lie. The third piece, at your first betrayal. But the biggest piece goes the moment pleasure takes hold of you. And when that moment comes, there's no turning back. The moment was in the spring of the second year. A full year had passed since I came to the Black Fortress. I was strong now. I was knowledgeable now. I was a weapon now. But I hadn't been tested yet. I hadn't touched blood yet. I close my eyes. The sound of rain fades away. And I'm there again, in the Black Fortress. The second spring, in that dark structure at the mountain peak. That morning, we woke with the call to prayer as usual. But there was a difference. Master Hazen came to the dormitory. He never normally came. There was a strange expression on his face. Happiness or worry, I couldn't tell. "Malik, Ismail, Tariq, Rashid," he said. "You have been chosen. There will be a special ceremony today. Get ready." Chosen? For what? We didn't dare ask questions. We just nodded. After breakfast, they took us to a different room. We hadn't seen this before. It was in the deepest part of the fortress. We descended stone stairs. Corridors were dark. Only torches burned. The walls were damp. The ceiling low. Breathing became difficult. We arrived at a door. A wooden door with that emblem again. Eagle and dagger. But this time, there was something else beneath it. The word paradise. In Arabic, written in gold leaf. Visitor whispered. The Paradise Room. I'd heard of it, but never seen it. "Silence," said Master Hazen. He opened the door. We entered, and what I saw at that moment took my breath away. The room was large. Colored fabrics hung from the ceiling. Red, purple, golden yellow. Carpets on the floor, thick, soft, woven from silk. Mirrors on the walls, shining, reflecting everything. In the center was a low divan with cushions, pillows on it. In the corner, a brazier with incense burning inside. Its scent was sweet, dizzying, sandalwood, rose, amber, unknown fragrances. But what was most surprising were the people. In the corners of the room, in the shadows, girls were sitting. Young girls, maybe 15, 16 years old. Their garments were thin, transparent, revealing the contours of their bodies. Their faces were covered, but their eyes were visible. Large, black, inviting eyes. I froze. I looked at Ismail. He was in shock too. Tariq swallowed. Rashid, however, had hunger in his eyes. Master Hazen smiled. "Welcome. This is your reward. For a year, you've worked hard. You've suffered. You've sacrificed yourselves. Now, we'll show you paradise on earth. Because this is what awaits you in the other world. In fact, even more. They sat us on the divan. The cushions were soft, as if we were sitting on clouds. One of the girls approached. She had a tray in her hand, with small cups on it. Inside was a dark-colored liquid. "Drink," said Master Hazen. "This opens the door to paradise. Drink and see. See what awaits you if you remain loyal." I looked at the cup. The liquid was black. It had a smell. Sweet but bitter, pleasant but repulsive. "What is this?" I asked. Opium, poppy extract. It frees your soul, brings you close to God. Don't be afraid. I was afraid, but I couldn't refuse. Because Master Hazen was waiting. Because the others were watching. Because this was a test. I took the cup, brought it to my lips, drank. The taste was terrible. Bitter, burning, my stomach churned. But I swallowed. Ismail drank too. Tariq too. Rashid too. We all drank. And we began to wait. For the first 5 minutes, nothing happened. We were just sitting in a strange anticipation. Then, suddenly, the room began to spin. Slowly, the fabrics on the ceiling were rippling, as if there was wind, but there wasn't. The mirrors were shining. Light reflections were dancing. My head grew heavy. My eyes blurred. I couldn't feel my arms. As if my body had disappeared. Only my head remained, like a balloon floating in the air. Then sounds began to come. Music. The sound of the oud. The sound of the ney. Drums. But no one was playing. The sounds were coming from the walls, from the ceiling, from the floor, from everywhere. Relax, said a voice. Master Hazen's voice. But it was distant, echoing. Let yourself go. You're not in the world anymore. You're in paradise. Am I in paradise? I tried to open my eyes. The girls were approaching, with slow movements, their hands reaching out, touching, soft hands, warm hands. My forehead, my cheeks, my shoulders. Be at ease, they were saying, voices like whispers. You are chosen. You are special. You deserve paradise. And at that moment, I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that I was truly in paradise. I wanted to believe that all the pain was worth this. One of the girls sat beside me, removed my headscarf, stroked my hair, her warm breath on my neck. Don't be afraid, she said. This is your place. This is your reward. Another was rubbing my feet, finger by finger, slowly, as if each touch was erasing a sign. Another was dancing in front of me, slow, hypnotic movements. Her body undulated, shadows dancing, and I was disappearing, losing myself. I wasn't Malik anymore. I wasn't anything anymore. I was just a being that felt. Only pleasure, only comfort, only happiness. I didn't realize time passing. Maybe an hour, maybe 5, maybe a day. I don't know. I only remember that at some point, I closed my eyes, and I saw dreams. Paradise gardens, rivers of honey, milk, wine, houris, angels, and a throne. Allah upon it, looking at me, smiling. Remain loyal, he says. Remain loyal, and this is yours. When I woke up, I was in another room, in the dormitory. In my bed, the sun was hitting my face. My head was throbbing, my mouth bone dry, my body wouldn't move. Ismail was sitting beside me. You're awake? He said. What happened? I asked. We saw paradise, he said. There was a light in his eyes. Pure faith. We saw it, Malik. The afterlife is real. We saw it. Tariq came too. He was saying the same things. I wouldn't have believed it, but now I believe. The sheikh was telling the truth. Paradise exists, and we will go there. Rashid didn't speak, but there was satisfaction on his face. And me? I believed too, because I saw, I felt, I lived it. Those girls were real. Those touches were real. Those gardens, those rivers, that throne was real. I didn't know. I didn't know then that it was all fake. Opium deceives the brain, shows hallucinations, makes non-existent things exist. And once you see it, you believe that hallucination is real. This is how brainwashing is done. Not with pain, but with pleasure. Not with fear, but with happiness. They show you paradise, then they say, look, there you are. But to get there, you must die for us here. And you accept. Because once you've tasted that paradise, you'll do anything. Maybe you've never consumed oatmeal. Maybe you've never had such an experience. But you're surely addicted to something. Maybe money. Maybe power. Maybe love. And for that thing, sometimes you make wrong decisions. Well, I became addicted that day, in that room. I became addicted to paradise. And this addiction led me to 23 murders. Underscoring the following days, everything changed. Our training was more intense now. We were harder, more ruthless, more dangerous now. But at the same time, more loyal. Because we knew if we succeeded, we'd see paradise again. Master Hazen constantly reminded us after every training session. Did you see? That's what the afterlife is like. But getting there isn't easy. You must be loyal. You must obey orders. And most importantly, you must do your duty. Because every mission earns you a rank in paradise. We didn't question. We didn't question anymore. Because we saw. And after seeing, the leading was easy. In the middle of the second year, special lessons began. Now it wasn't just combat with weapons, but real professional lessons were being given. Yusuf Effendi was a well-traveled man. He spoke of Syria, Iran, Anatolia, even Europe. He showed us maps, the locations of cities, roads, passages, palaces, courts. A devoted one can enter anywhere, he'd say. But for this, he must know languages, must know disguises, must know customs. He taught us Persian. He taught us Kurdish, Turkish, Armenian, Greek, even a little Latin. You'll talk with crusaders, he said. You'll appear as one of them. Then you'll strike. Every language was a new identity. Every accent, a new personality. And we, like theater actors, were taking on roles. David's laboratory was in the darkest place in the fortress. Shelves full of bottles, tubes, powders. It smelled sharp, burning, sometimes unbearable. Poison is a matter of patience, David would say. He was young, weak. When he spoke, his eyes would fixate on the bottles, as if they were his favorite children. He taught us arsenic production, extracting scorpion venom, storing snake venom, distilling hemlock essence, using belladonna. Every poison has a dose, he'd say. Too little, no effect. Too much, immediately obvious. But the right dose kills after 3 days, and no one understands. We did experiments on mice, on chickens, once on a dog. We watched how they trembled and died, how they gasped and couldn't breathe, how they writhed and gave up their lives. At first it made me sick, but then I got used to it, because these were just animals, not the humans I'd kill tomorrow. Hakim el-Din's lessons were the most dangerous, because he wasn't just making us killers. He was making us liars, manipulators, soulless. Humans live with their emotions, he'd say. Their fear, love, anger, pride. If you control these emotions, you control the person. He taught us psychological games, how to gain trust, how to lie so no one understands, how to deceive someone, how to use someone. Find your target's weak point, he'd say. If they love money, approach with money. If they love women, with women. If they love power, promise power. And then, after gaining trust, strike. We did role-playing exercises. I was a merchant. Ismail was a pilgrim. Tariq was a soldier. Rashid was a slave. In each role, we became the character. Our way of speaking changed. Our walk changed. Even our thoughts changed. A good devoted one has 100 faces, Hakim el-Din would say, and behind every face, the real face is hidden. After the paradise room, relationships between us changed. Ismail had become more religious. He never missed his prayers. He'd make supplications. Allah protects us, he'd say. We are Allah's soldiers. Tariq, however, was more withdrawn. He wouldn't talk. just watched. At night, sometimes he wouldn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling. When I'd ask, "What are you thinking?" he'd say, "Nothing." Rashid was competitive, always trying to be the best. In combat, trying to surpass me. In lessons, trying to outdo me. "I'll be the best on the first mission," he'd say. "The Sheik will see me, and me?" I was just waiting for when the mission would come, because I knew that when the mission came, the real test would begin. In the 8th month of the 2nd year, simulations began. Practice for real missions. Fake palaces were set up in the courtyard. Inside were target dummies. Our task was to infiltrate, kill the target, escape. Time was kept. Those who made mistakes were punished. In the first simulation, I was a disaster. I killed the target, but got caught while escaping. Faizi Effendi beat me. "You'll die like this," he shouted. "Killing the target is easy. Escaping is hard." In the second simulation, I was better. I killed the target, escaped, but I made too much noise. "Be silent," sighed Faizi Effendi. "Be like a shadow." In the third simulation, I was perfect. I entered. No one saw. I approached the target from behind, drew my knife, stabbed it into the throat. No sound. I went outside. No one noticed. Faizi Effendi clapped my shoulder. "Now you're ready." One evening, Sheikh Suleiman came to the courtyard. He rarely came, but that day he was there. He sat on his throne. Masters lined up around him. "My devoted ones," he said. His voice echoed, bouncing off the mountains and returning. "The time has come. The first mission will be given. 4 devoted ones have been chosen. Malik, Ismail, Tariq, Rashid." My heart started to race. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "Your mission," said the Sheikh. "In Aleppo, there's a crusader lord. His name is Raymond de Montfort. A cruel man. He burns Muslim villages, kills women, children. You must punish him." He stopped, looked at us. "This mission is your first test. If you succeed, you become true devoted ones. If you fail, you don't return here." "Understood." "Understood, Master," we all said. "Yusuf, give them the file." Yusuf Effendi stepped forward. He had a leather bag in his hand. Opened it. Inside were papers, a map, a miniature portrait. "Raymond de Montfort," said Yusuf, 45 years old, lives in a chateau north of Aleppo. 20 soldiers around him. Every night, he eats his dinner in the great hall. Then he retires to his room. His room is on the 3rd floor of the chateau. His window faces the garden. He opened the map. Here's the chateau. Here's the garden. Here are the walls. You can climb from here. Here's the room. Here's the escape route. Everything was planned. Every detail thought through. We just had to execute. "You leave tomorrow morning," said the Sheikh. "In 10 days, the mission will be completed. May Allah be with you." The next morning, we set out. 4 horses, 4 devoted ones. We had our black robes, but didn't wear them on the road. We were disguised as merchants, cloth sellers. This disguise was the safest, because merchants go everywhere. No one suspects. The journey lasted 10 days. We passed through mountains, valleys, villages. Sometimes we lodged, sometimes we slept on the roadside. We never spoke. Only the mission was on our minds. When we arrived in Aleppo, the city was crowded. Crusaders were everywhere. Armor gleaming, swords warm. But because we were merchants, no one looked. We entered an inn. The inn Yusuf Effendi described. The innkeeper didn't know who we were, but gave us a special room. Probably the sect had connections. That night, we gathered in the room, spread the map, reviewed it one last time. "Ismail and I will climb the wall," I said. "Tariq, you wait in the garden, guard the escape route. Rashid, You prepare the horses outside. Rashid objected. Why am I staying outside? I want to go inside too. Because one of us must be outside, I said. And you're the best horseman. He wasn't pleased, but accepted. We prepared our weapons. Knives, ropes, grappling hooks, poison vials. Everything was ready. Anyone afraid? I asked. No one spoke, but I saw fear in their eyes. We were all afraid. Because this was real now. Not a dummy. We'd kill a real human. Allah is with us, said Ismail. We shouldn't be afraid. Because we're right. We are Allah's soldiers. And I believed him. At that moment, I truly believed. At midnight, we set out. The chateau was outside the city. We walked in the darkness. There was no moon, only stars shining. When we arrived at the chateau, we stopped at the base of the wall. It was high, maybe 5 meters, but we'd had climbing training. Ismail threw the rope. The hook caught on the wall. He climbed first, then me, silently. You weren't even breathing. At the top of the wall, we looked at the garden. It was empty. The guards had changed shifts. There was a 5-minute gap. Yusuf Effendi had been right. We jumped, landed on soft grass. Tariq stayed in the shadows. We pressed against the chateau wall, glided toward the window. 3rd floor. We began to climb. The stones were rough, easy to grip. We reached the window. I looked inside. A room. A large bed. A man was sleeping on it. Raymond de Montfort. His portrait was in my memory. It was him. I opened the window. Slowly, it didn't creak. I slipped inside. Ismail followed. I approached the bed. The man was snoring, probably drunk. His face was red, mouth open, sweaty. I drew my knife, holding it in my hand. Cold metal, heavy, as if it weighed tons. Ismail signaled with his head. Do it, he said silently. I raised the knife. Over Raymond's chest. The heart was right there. I knew. We'd learned in training. Left chest between the 4th ribs. Back to the heart. I took a breath, like my last breath, and I stabbed. The knife went in. Poor flesh. Didn't get through bone, but slid between the ribs. Found the heart. I felt it. I felt warmth. Blood flowed from the knife handle, got on my hand. Raymond's eyes opened. Instantaneous. Shocked. Pain-filled. He looked at me. Opened his mouth, but no sound came. Just a groan. Blood came from his mouth. Foaming. I twisted the knife inside. Pushed it deeper. To shred the heart. Raymond's body convulsed. Once. Twice. And relaxed. His eyes froze. He was looking, not seeing. He died. I had killed a human for the first time. For the first time, with my hand, my knife, I had taken a life. Do you know what I felt? Nothing. For a moment, nothing. Just emptiness. Then a relief. It's done, I said to myself. Mission complete. I pulled out the knife. Blood spurted. Stained the bed. Dripped on the floor. My hands were bright red. Ismail looked at the door. Hurry, he said. We turned to the window. Went outside. Climbed. Descended. Tariq was waiting. Done? He said. Done, I said. We ran. From the garden, from the wall, outside. Rashid had prepared the horses. We mounted. We rode. We disappeared into the darkness of night. Screams were coming from behind us. The Lord has been killed. The killers are escaping. But they didn't catch us. Because we were shadows. 10 days later, we returned to the Black Forest. Everyone was waiting at the gate. Master Hazim, Hazi Effendi, David, Hakim El-Din, the other devoted ones. We dismounted. Master Hazim approached. Did you succeed? We succeeded, Master, I said. For certain? For certain. I stabbed my knife into its heart. He died. Master Hazen smiled. Then he shouted, "Mission successful. Our devoted ones have returned." Applause rose. Everyone was celebrating. They were congratulating us. We were lifted on shoulders, carried to the courtyard, where was festivity. Food was served, sherbets were drawn. Sheik Sun came, kissed each of us. "Well done," he said. "Well done, my loyal servants. Now you are true devoted ones." Then a ceremony was held. Our sashes were changed, from red to orange to second rank. We were real devoted ones now. And that night, we received our reward. We entered the paradise room. Opium was given. Girls bathed. We experienced pleasure. We tasted paradise. And I was happy. Truly happy. Because one completed the mission. Because I received my reward. Because I earned paradise. But that night, as I lay down, I noticed something. I had cleaned my hands, washed them, with water, with soap, scrubbing. But the smell of blood was still there, as if my skin was stained with blood. And Raymond's face, that last look in his eyes, shocked, pain-filled, questioning. Why? He seemed to be asking. What did I do? I didn't know. According to what I was told, he was cruel. He burned villages. He killed people. But was he really? Or were we just told that? I didn't think. I decided not to think. Because if I think, I doubt. If I doubt, I question. If I question, I betray. And I couldn't betray. Because gold was going to my family. Because I saw paradise. Because there was no other way now. I open my eyes now. The rain is still falling, but it's slowed a bit. The sky is brightening. Morning is approaching. The first blood was the easiest, because I believed. The second blood was easier. The third, even easier. Then I forgot to count. But the story doesn't end here. Because on the third mission, I saw something. I learned something. And that thing would change everything.